Hello friends, so today's video we are back with another adult fantasy book recommendations list, but books that are not Sanderson. So I've done 2 videos so far going over some books that aren't Sanderson, some of which are not as popular, some of which are still popular depending on maybe you've read a lot of Sanderson, you're just looking to read something else, but you still want to be on the hype train for popular books, or maybe you're looking for something that's a little bit underhyped. So I wanted to have a mix of both. And for today, all of the books on this list are books that I absolutely love. But, this first one I don't see talked about on BookTube very often. It has a lot of ratings. I just don't feel like it's that popular now, and maybe wasn't ever really online as much. But either way, the first recommendation would be Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. When I mention this book, I do feel the need to clarify that I've only read the first book in this series, and I have seen mixed things about the continuation of the series, but I can't comment on those continuations because I haven't read on. But this first book is fantastic, and I love it even having only read the first one. So it is one of those I'm going to tell you my life story setups. We follow a man named Valen, who he went to, I always describe it as the Navy SEALs training for children. That's basically what he had to go through as a child. They go through the most intense, difficult of things. Sometimes some of these kids don't make it. It's very rigorous. The weak do not make it. It's difficult. And so you not only see this aspect, but you find out a little bit more about his family and their background, and you also start to see the other people that he's surrounded by in this school, whether they be the adults or the other kids, as he's growing up, kids that you're like, oh, that stupid kid. As you get to know the kids more, the more you get to see the ways in which their families have affected them, and then the kid that you thought was annoying, now you feel for, and it's just, he's so masterful at crafting very real feeling people. And as I'm describing the book, I personally think it sounds a little boring as I'm describing it, but it's not. It's captivating. His writing is not particularly flowery, but I still think it's very, very beautiful. And I absolutely love it. And it makes certain aspects that should just be basic day-to-day things. You find this human connection in his writing. And then, of course, he does get older. He becomes a man, and then there's a little bit more action, and the plot is pushed forward a little bit more. But I think this is a fantastic book. Highly, highly recommend. Next up is a book that I have sung its praises quite a lot this year ever since I read it. I have very much enjoyed it, and that would be The Boneshard Daughter. So, as is the case with newer fantasy, it seems like they're very popular because they're newer, and so you're hearing people talk about it, you're seeing it at the store. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like they're as well known still as a lot of the big names in fantasy, and this particular author in particular, I think that I am excited to see where their career goes. If they choose to write more books after this series, I'm going to be very excited about it. I'm excited to see where she takes this series, but just having this book, The Boneshard Daughter, there's so many aspects to it that I think are amazing. First off, she utilizes both first and third person, which I think is really interesting. The magic system is fascinating. If you like a cool magic system, check this one out. It's not just, oh, I can do this cool thing, but the way that the magic plays a role in day-to-day life for everyone across the realm is so cool to see, and you get snippets of it, which I think makes for great world building. The characters are interesting, and plus it feels like a genre bender. It feels like fantasy with hints of horror and hints of sci-fi. And I don't feel like I can even say too much as to why on the sci-fi aspects, but it's just sort of one of the common questions that comes up in sci-fi books. I think that this sort of hits on it. The setup for the story, we have a couple of main characters. One of them is a man named Jovis, who is trying to find his missing wife. He's trying to lay low, but is very unsuccessful in doing that. He has a tendency to get a lot of spotlight put on him, and people start to see him a certain way, and you're like, oh, Jovis. And he also has an animal companion, mythological creature companion, and it's precious. And then the other main character is where you get to see the magic more and the horror aspects a little bit more. So the magic system has to do with putting commands into pieces of bone that you've kind of placed together and created a being, and all these different commands create low-level beings all the way up to extremely intelligent high-level beings. They are basically spies for you. They can do anything, if not more than a regular human would be able to do. And so you see the effects of these things throughout the kingdom, and you see these things throughout the land. So the emperor is the only one that really has the knowledge to do this magic, and his daughter has lost her memories, and he's pushing her to try to remember everything. But in trying to remember things, she's discovering some other aspects that she wasn't expecting. That's very mysterious, and I really, really like. Next up, we have Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This one is very unique in that, you know, the whole concept of the chosen one. So this story follows a character that kind of has a chosen one feel, except for you don't know really if they're the chosen one or if they're actually the bad guy, and they're kind of perhaps bringing about evil. And they don't really know either, but they're like, this is just the thing I'm destined for, so I gotta do it. And you really like them. They're really nice and they're really sweet. But it's interesting because there's a lot of times in whatever you want to call this, whether it's a chosen one or the path to becoming the antagonist, either way, you usually see reluctance. And it's so different to see a character that's like, this is my fate, so I gotta go do it, I guess. And he is really sweet, and you get his backstory, and it's a very kind of messed up, twisted. I mean, that book has a not easy opening to get through. It's icky, I gotta say. But it's captivating. It pulls you in very quickly. And part of why you aren't sure if he's good or bad is because you see other characters who don't want him to do the thing that he's supposed to do, and you understand their reasons. And there's some, I'm going to call it political intrigue with some of the other characters. And then you also have a character that's essentially the lovable criminal type, and they're tasked with bringing our chosen one-esque character from point A to point B, and so you see them get to know each other, and the character relationship is one that I really, really like. I think that this book is very fast-paced and is both complex and intricate, but also easy to read. Part of what I like is I feel like I'm still a little in the dark, and so I'm excited for the sequel because I'm waiting to know a little bit more of the world. I feel like we only barely scratched the surface. Next up, we have Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. So First Law is very popular by this author, and Best Served Cold is generally the book that people recommend reading after you've read First Law, although you don't have to, but there's some little cameos, and it's fun to see those. Best Served Cold is a classic revenge story, and it has the classic, is this really worth the price? And our main character's like, I don't know, and I don't care. And so it sort of plays around a little bit with the expectations you typically have when you're reading a revenge story. And the main character is a bulldozer. She is just going to do what she's going to do, and she doesn't care if you don't want to do it, if you're not along for the ride anymore, then fine, screw you. That's kind of her attitude. And the other characters, in typical Abercrombie fashion, are fleshed out incredibly well. You'll find yourself loving them, and then other times you hate them. And he just taps into the brutality that human beings are capable of, while also making you see compassionate moments that then makes you decide, oh, even though they did this terrible thing over here, but like in this moment they cried though. I think it's a great revenge story. I think it's a great fantasy standalone. I enjoy all the character work. Next up, we have a very popular fantasy series, but I wanted to include it. It is an author that I have mentioned before. She's written quite a few books, and that would be V.E. Schwab. Shades of Magic, I think, had its phases. V.E. Schwab has had her phases. We've seen V.E. Schwab where nobody really talked about her. She's had some issues with publishers, and she had a very difficult time really establishing her name and her stories. And then all of a sudden it felt like, you know how a lot of times when people become successful, it feels like their career has just blown up, when in actuality they've been going for years, and you just didn't really see it. You didn't see all that time they put in. You didn't see all the hard work and the way they had to persevere through a lot of obstacles. I think V.E. Schwab is one of those people. Shades of Magic is the thing that I think really blew up, but as a result, it was everywhere, and there's so many editions, and so many people were talking about it, that I think it was almost incapable of living up to the hype, and now it's settled down. And now I feel like it's a good time to check out Shades of Magic, because I think you won't have all of the absolute love and adoration for that series being the only thing you've heard. You've probably seen that, but then you've also seen some criticisms, and so you can go in with more realistic expectations. You've probably heard the premise. There is a man who has magical abilities that allow him to go between parallel Londons, but each of these parallel Londons, while London is basically the same, the world outside of London is different, and there's also colors to the worlds, and you're not really supposed to take artifacts from one to the next. And the setup for the first one is that something does get brought from one of these Londons to the other, and it brings maybe more with it than our character was expecting. It starts very slow in the first book, and then it takes off, and it goes very fast. And when you think about how much time passed, not a lot. So you don't actually get to really know the characters all that well in that first book. But the second book, V. Schwab has kind of structured the trilogy so that it feels as if you have a different main character in each book, even though you see some of the characters again. But the second book follows a different character a little bit more than the first book did. You get to know this character more while also getting to know people from the first one more. And then the third book, everything starts going down. Villainous characters from before, now you start to see a little different. You get a little bit more of them, and the stakes get raised quite a lot. And you just really don't know what our characters are going to do. And I think overall, it's a trilogy. It was quite great. I know that it has been very hyped up before, but like I said, I think now is a good time to check it out if you haven't yet. Last on the list would be The Wolf of Orin Yaru. This story follows a woman who has a very tenuous hold on her land. She has a lot of other people that are just snakes waiting to bite. And she has so many expectations placed on her shoulders, not only from the people surrounding her, who she doesn't always know who to trust and who is dangerous, but her late father. The influence that even in death that he has on her is something that I think a lot of people, they can connect with strangely, that expectation to live up to something, even when that person's not actually there to place that on you. And so you hear that voice in her head that she sometimes has to question, is this really what I think, or is this what my father would have wanted of me? On top of all of this, she is a mother. Her son is somebody who can be used against her. She's always fearful for him. But on top of all of that, her husband, the father of her son, has gone missing. You don't really know why he's gone. You don't know if he left because of something she did, if he left because of something he wanted. You don't know. You have no idea why he left, but she has an opportunity to potentially find him again and patch things up, which she kind of needs to help keep her country, the hold on her country, stable. But you also don't know in her opportunity to go find him if it's actually a trap, and she doesn't want to leave her child behind, but she also feels like she can't bring him along with. So right from the start, there's a lot at stake. And then once the story gets going, it's one of those books where you don't really know what's going to happen next, and you almost don't really know what the plot is at some point, because while that's the setup, if you pick it up, you'll see what I mean. And we find our character having to claw tooth and nail through everything. That's it for some non-Sanderson adult fantasy recommendations. I will have parts 1 and 2 linked down below. I can also still continue to do these because there are so many more. And if I have individual book reviews for any of these, I'll have them linked as well as purchase links in case you're wanting to check any of them out. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.